let's talk about surviving other things, and like by that I mean surviving riots. So tell us about the diet riot. What is the diet riot?
The
Riot
riot
diet,
diet.
right? I'm
Um,
my own SSRIs are kicking
yeah.
in now.
Well, it was a joke that we had while we were on the road. So I covered after George Floyd. There was Memorial Day weekend in DC was absolutely insane, and people don't realize, maybe they forget that the White House is nearly overrun,
Mm.
and there was a fire that was set right next to St. John's Church, which is just up Lafayette Park, on the edge of Lafayette Park, which is like a block away from the White House. And my coworkers, Shelby Talcott and Jorge Ventura, were there on Friday. I got down on Monday, the Bible photo op day, when Trump brought the Bible out in front of St. John's Church.
That's right.
But they filmed like looting, all kinds of fires that were being set. And then we went to Seattle, the Chaz. We went to Portland. We went to New York. There's not a little occupied zone there. We went to Kenosha, and that was just the BLM side of things that year. But the lockdowns really, like, I think helped amplify people's anguish, people's anger. And so like the only they weren't even allowing religious services to take place, but they were giving a free pass for protests. So that's literally the most widespread protest movement in American history if you just look at the raw numbers.
Hmm.
And I wrote the book because I knew that this was history. And I talked to publishers in 2022, and they were like, no, Trump's not going to make it through the primaries, including conservative publishers. And oh, yeah, DeSantis is going to beat him. And I was like, no, they're like, Trump era is old news. I'm like, no, this is definitely history. And I wrote the book accordingly and started my own publishing company to publish it. But when I was coming up with the title, we would be on the road and everything's shut down. And so we would eat like fast food. We're eating at all weird hours of the night, covering these riots. So we had the riot diet. But then what I explained in the book is not just like what I saw, but what I filmed and what news companies bought it and how much they paid and what went viral and what didn't. And so the riot diet is also what everybody was consuming on their news feeds.
Mm.
And the answer to that is similar to McDonald's. It's like the content that appeals to your lizard brain is the stuff that's going to go viral, and the stuff that requires like cerebral thinking in the frontal cortex is not going to go viral. And the mostly peaceful stuff, even if it was mostly peaceful, people wouldn't see it unless if it bleeds, it leads.
Yep.
So that's the riot diet.
Incredible. And for those listening, we got the just in our description we have a link to the book, so you got to check it out. A lot of your reporting and the videos that were coming out from those riots, from like the George Floyd stuff, a lot of that, like a lot of stuff that was coming out, and you and Jorge, like I remember that's I think my first time seeing anything from you guys. So you guys traveled together, right, from all those
Yeah.
riots?
So Jorge, I describe it in the book. Jorge showed up as an unpaid intern literally the day before George Floyd was killed. And
Wow.
the riots and protests across the country all started like 3 days later on that Thursday night. It started in Minneapolis, and then Friday it kicked off in DC and other cities. And so Jorge was literally an unpaid intern for most of the civil unrest. We finally got a salaried gig. We were like, all right, you got hit by an Uber in Chaz, so now we'll give you a salary.
Wow.
But and Shelby Talcott was my other coworker. She's a former pro tennis player,
Hmm.
and she's total badass. She always joked like, yeah, I've gotten some death threats covering this stuff, but none as bad as when I was a pro tennis player, because all these degenerate gamblers bet on women's tennis.
That's
But so
hilarious.
they'd send her death threats. But yeah, so we were a crew on the ground, and from the beginning of the unrest, our MO was, number one, the corporate media has these huge cameras and they're sitting outside talking about the platitudes. Well, it's mostly peaceful, very much a party-like atmosphere. And we went in with our cell phones and just recorded the raw video. And the second aspect of what we were trying to do was not only access a different side of the protests than you could get with a big camera, but also to put the video out there without commentary and just let the audience decide for themselves.
Yep.
So whether it was the Proud Boys beating up on somebody outside Chaz, or whether it was, nobody admits to being Antifa, but the black bloc clad people that I call the Umbrella Gang,
Hmm.
because they hide behind their umbrellas as shields. Whether it was one of those two groups, we filmed all of it, and we put the footage out regardless of political ideation of the people involved. So our job was, if the cops were beating up on the protesters or vice versa, we would put it out there. And you can't trust the protest side or the police side to tell you what happened. So our role was to be in between that.
Yeah, it was incredible. So I remember a lot of those videos, and funny enough, that the phrase inverted world came out of watching those videos for me. Cause I'm like, I'm seeing the raw video, and I have friends, this is why I'm still in New York, who are like, they think all this is good and mostly peaceful, right? I'm in New York at the time, so not hard to believe. And I started realizing I'm in an upside down, I'm in another world altogether. I could show them footage of things happening that would support what I'm saying, and they still wouldn't believe it. It was a lot like when I showed people a video of Trump and the good people on both sides thing, find people on both sides.
Yep.
And if you showed them the whole clip, maybe some of them would be like, oh, wow, I didn't know he said that. But others would just refuse to accept it. So I started feeling like I'm in the inverted world, which is really funny, because when I came down here to do this with Tim, he had that phrase in his mind already as well for other reasons. But I think about that often, because that summer showed me, like, just because we can all look at the same thing doesn't mean we're going to actually interpret it the same way, which is terrifying.
Yeah, and that's what I talk about a lot in the book, is specifically what news companies and what echo chamber paid attention, and obviously I covered January 6th too, and a whole different set of news companies paid attention to that footage, or when the Proud Boys were violent in the Stop the Steal rallies. But having run a business, the video business for the Daily Caller, where I was running the video there during this time, having run a business on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, I became very aware of how those echo chambers function, and furthermore, how the content that's going to surface and go viral is the content, like I said, that's going to be infuriating rather than, stop and make you think. And the more that news agencies only serve content to what their audience serve content that their audience wants to see, the more radicalized and the more entrenched each side is going to become. Yep. And I think Trump's most recent victory was at least testament to the fact that new media plays a new role in the discourse. Cable news and print media doesn't have the same grip on the conversation that they used to. But also secondarily, in this new world, it comes with a new set of challenges. Because, these people in Silicon Valley are writing these algorithms and deciding what rabbit holes you're going to go down.
Yeah, that to me is the next thing that I think I'm worried about. To answer my own question from earlier, like, what's next is the Silicon Valley algorithm brain that we're going to have. But back to the riots, were you able to start feeling like the sense, or did you ever feel the sense that some of these riots were inorganic? Because there's a lot of theories going around, like, oh, the bricks showed up, someone paid for them.
Yeah.
Like, was that something you were ever thinking about when you were on the ground?
It's really hard to give a really concrete answer to that, because the people that I saw who looked really professional are in and out, and they're not going to stop for an interview. So I interviewed Kyle Rittenhouse 13 minutes before the shooting, and a number of other people who were setting fires and looting. But the people who smash the window and spray that little bit of lighter fluid, they have a little, can, and they're totally masked up. You can't see. They have gloves on. They squirt it in there and they light the fire. Those people aren't sticking around. What I can say is that in Kenosha, for example, we found out a year and change later during the trial that the feds had a drone that was flying right above the shooting that showed very clear footage of the pursuit of Joseph Rosenbaum, who I was right behind when the shooting went off, and also a Cessna, which had thermal footage. And actually, the one thing I'll thank the FBI for is I told the police night of, I looked down as Rosenbaum was collapsing. It was Rittenhouse shot 4 shots in 0.7 seconds. And I told him just genuinely on the night of, I was like, I looked down, and I thought to myself, did I just get effing shot? I felt something go past my legs. And I stamped my feet, and then I ran over to Rosenbaum. So I told him that, and the prosecution made me a victim. So not only was I key witness, but also a victim in that case. And everybody on the right was like, oh, well, he's lying about the bullet. And actually, the thermal footage shows the heat signature of the bullet skipping off the ground. So I will thank the FBI for that. But if they had a Cessna above, that begs the question. I've talked to a lot of FBI guys since then. They definitely had human intelligence on the ground. And if they had human intelligence on the ground and they knew all this stuff was happening, is the third night of rioting, the third night that all the buildings in the commercial district around the courthouse were just getting torched. And I didn't see anything that was done to stop it. And the National Guard that was there was only guarding the courthouse.
Right.
So if our federal law enforcement agency is like monitoring this stuff so closely, and yet they're not actually, that I could see, doing anything tangible to stop it, then what is it they're doing there?
Well, my theory is that they're instigating it and letting it go down. Who knows? But we've had like Ashton Forbes on the show. He talks about the orbs and the Malaysian plane. But the thing that's most fascinating and scary to me is, he talks a lot about the Lockheed Martin spy satellites that are heat mapping the globe all the time. So it's like they know what's going on always. There's footage of like the world in Lockheed Martin, head HQ. So who knows? Maybe they're just observing because they're like, they don't want us to know that they're omniscient. They're like a fake god floating around the sky. But that's insane.
Well, I've also heard the theory that the masking stuff was a live training to train machine AI to be able to recognize faces even if you have a mask on. Because what you need is a massive sample source in order to train that machine learning to do that. And so we would see trucks with like cameras on the back, unmarked police vehicles.
Wow.
Just like a GMC pickup truck with tinted windows. And then like on the hitch, there'd be like a camera back there.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, you would never get answers on stuff like that because those guys aren't going to stop and talk to you.
Right. Yeah. And then I think that's the evolution of something like Clearview AI, which is a giant facial recognition database where like, okay, now we want to know like if we can identify someone just from their eyes. Because remember, didn't the Apple iPhone update sometime after COVID to be able to open up the phone with just a mask on and like just knowing your eyes?
Yeah, I don't use that facial recognition stuff. And James
weird.
O'Keefe just showed court documents that stated that the FBI, when they did the raid on his house, they got a subpoena for not only his phone, but also like the biodata that was associated with his facial recognition, thumbprint, all that.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
Terrifying. So back to Kenosha, though, it must have been insane to then pulled into a court, and have to testify. For those who don't know, can you talk about testifying and how that went down?
So I had a really strange role because, like I said, I told the police that I looked down, and the prosecution took that statement and made me a victim of reckless endangerment. And my best friend from home, his dad is a criminal lawyer, and he agreed to just help me out, just advise me on what was happening. And so the criminal complaint came out. Joseph Rosenbaum effectively died in my arms. He was pronounced dead within minutes of me dropping him in the ER. And I didn't know who Rosenbaum was at the time. I didn't know until the criminal complaint came out a couple of days later that he had been convicted of a number of sexual crimes against minors that are detestable.
Yeah.
But at the time that I experienced it, all I knew was that I saw so much regret in his eyes. So it did make some sense after I learned that. But I immediately asked my lawyer, I was like, they made me a victim and it's carrying up to 15 years. And in Wisconsin, you can get acquitted of self-defense, but still charged with reckless endangerment of another individual. So it's possible you got acquitted on everything, but still charged with endangering me. And I was like, I want to drop the charges. I don't want to be a victim. Like, I want to just tell people what I saw.
Right.
And he was like, well, if you do that ahead of the trial, you can, but then you'll be perceived as a biased witness. And so if your goal is to get the truth out there, you have to be perceived as impartial. And so I actually thought that I was filming the shooting. I actually told the cops when I got to the hospital, look, I have it right here. And I realized that in the commotion, I took a photo of the ground. So that's why my testimony was critical to the first shooting of Joseph Rosenbaum, because I was the closest one to it. And the only video is from like 50 feet away. It was Drew Hernandez who filmed that. Wow. But I basically had to roll the dice as both a witness and a victim. And I saw Rosenbaum chase Rittenhouse. I saw Rittenhouse with the gun aimed 45 degrees at the ground. When a gunshot went off, he turned around and Rosenbaum continued to pursue him. He screamed, F you, threw a bag at him. He screamed, F you. And then he dove for the gun and Rittenhouse dodged around and shot 4 times. And so that was good for the defense insofar as I saw that very closely and was able to testify to that. With that being said, the defense wanted me to say that I wasn't afraid for my life. when the shooting went off. And there were other gunshots going off at the same time. And that wasn't the truth. I absolutely was afraid for my life, and I was under oath. And if I was truly going to testify, then I couldn't just say what I wanted to say in order to get me out of the crosshairs, so that I wouldn't have, result in Kyle Rittenhouse getting thrown in jail.
Right.
So if I was telling the truth, I had to tell the truth. And I said I was afraid for my life, and the defense wasn't happy with that. And when they finally announced the verdict, they read my name as one of the victims. And the only person who was happier than me was Kyle Rittenhouse. And I mean, I was happy for selfish reasons that I wouldn't have to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, because he got thrown in jail only because of my charges. So,
right.
I mean, that's the personal side of it. I mean, the whole surreal part about testifying was that you have the jury right there. It was broadcast live. And then you have Kyle Rittenhouse looking with his baby face right at me. And I had to just avert my eyes from him, because I had to detach myself from the human life that was hanging in the balance and serve my role of a witness, which is just telling the truth.
Right. That was crazy. I watched it live.
But the media, like the left and the right, the right ended up appreciating my testimony because Kyle eventually got off and I saw him lunge. But then at the same time, my experience with Rosenbaum was something tragic, and my account of that, not knowing who Rosenbaum was, also was not what the right wanted to hear. And so I got a ton of crap for giving that personal account, and also asking the question of like, okay, yes, the city was burning. Yes, the police were absent from defending these businesses. But if you're a conservative, shouldn't you ask the question of what kind of parent lets their 17-year-old go out to a riot with an AR-15? And as it turns out, Rittenhouse's dad, the only accounts I've heard of him being present were him leaving drunken messages on his lawyer's answering machine. Anthony Huber, who hit Kyle in the head with a skateboard, he had an absent father. Jacob Blake, who was shot by police and caused the entire riot, his dad didn't come out of the woodwork until Blake got shot, and he wanted to sue the government. Joseph Rosenbaum was sexually abused by his stepdad when he was a young kid, and the kids that he abused are in jail for the same crime. And Gage Groskowitz, who had his bicep shut off, also a broken home. So it's difficult for me because I can't ignore that aspect, the deeper story there of this tragedy and all these broken homes in this broken city in the Rust Belt. And my bringing that up, is not savory to this. Everybody wants for tragedies like this to be packaged up, whether it's January 6th or Kenosha. Like, he's either a hero or he's a white supremacist. And the nuance, the gray area, if you stand in between on that, you're going to get blasted. I'm not asking for sympathy because I knew I was kicking the hornet's nest by recounting that stuff. But I told the story the only way I knew how, which is from my personal perspective.
Right.